I always think it's important how to begin. You know, how we talk to a lot of different groups. We're older educators, we are lifelong meditators, and I searched and I struggled a bit with how to begin tonight. So we also used to introduce ourselves with our long biographies and our list of degrees and job histories, and then we decided that got very boring after a while, and the list was too long. It didn't mean it was just words after a while. So I like to introduce us now, at least myself, by saying that the things that I'm proudest of in my life are two things. One is that my 94-year-old mother, who is now cognitively impaired and was a brilliant woman and is still struggling to hold on to the identity that she was so attached to, is totally dependent on me and on us now. So that's the number one thing I'm proud of tonight. And the second thing is that we raised a severely autistic child, our youngest child, and she had multiple handicaps, and that's the second thing. So forget the rest of it. You know, it'll be all right in my obituary, but if I have to talk heart to heart and get down to brass tacks, that's how I want you to know me. So I was working on my talk Friday night and trying to wrestle back and forth with what I was going to talk about. And first of all, my computer went down, which of course has happened to me before at important moments, and that's a good way to get yourself back into the moment of just being with yourself. So that was the first shock. So I was with myself and I was very silent in front of the computer, and then someone came over and helped me fix the computer. And when he was on the computer, he announced to me that Paris had been attacked. So that was the second shock. And I thought, really, that's really how I should start tonight, to talk about what happens in our lives when we have a shock. Because really, as humans, most of us have had shocks in our life, and I like to unfortunately say that none of us get through this life scot-free. And some of us would like to learn ways, and for us it was meditation, to meet those shocks, which are inevitable, and to have as full a life as we can have, no matter what happens, what kind of things happen to us. So we're all in that mode of having heard about Paris, and I thought that was a good note to begin with, because that's something that we share. People in the room have shared their stories with me and different things that have happened, but that's very up close and personal for most of us right now. And what that incident brought back for me was a memory of a story that I heard Thich Nhat Hanh tell years ago about when, some of you know him, he's a very fine teacher of mindfulness. He talked about when he was escaping from the Viet Cong, when the Vietnamese war was ending, and how people were frantically trying to get their families, their friends, their pets, everyone they could into any kind of boat to get out and to get away before the Viet Cong arrived. And he said that everyone was using, maybe it's a little bit like the Syrians, any kind of thing that would float, boats that were leaking, people were riding on doors, people were piling people they loved onto anything that would float. And he said that his experience, which was so profound, was that if one person in the boat could remain calm, it meant the difference between life and death for the entire boat. So in tough moments, that's also been something that I like to remember. And a little bit of clips of the news that I saw when I saw that when some of the Parisians were leaving the stadium, they all sang the national anthem. That just reminded me of that maybe that was a reaching for that kind of finding a place in oneself where one could bear the unbearable and try to survive the unbearable. So something that's important for me in thinking about what the essence of mindfulness-based stress reduction or any good meditation program is the lesson that it teaches that most of the time we live in a very small part of ourselves, and that is a danger and a risk for humans. That the tendency when we're in pain is to contract. And for those of us who want to find a way to reduce stress, it raises a question of how can we not live in such a small and narrow and reactive part of ourselves. And that's part of why we're here tonight. And Jim and I divide the talk. So I speak about why we think it's important, and he's going to speak about what mindfulness-based stress reduction is and how we approach it. So I also remembered, in thinking about being here with you tonight, that a few years ago I was at a conference at Harvard Medical School, and it was a conference on meditation and psychotherapy. And the Dalai Lama was the keynote speaker. It was a standing room only crowd. And all the big psychologists and psychiatrists in the country were in the room. And some of them were up on the stage, all the heavy hitters, and the rest of us were in the audience. And it was a very interesting intellectual conversation and exchange. And then at one point, some of you have seen or heard the Dalai Lama, in his inimitable, childlike, feigned innocence, he started chuckling. His shoulders were going up and down, and he started chuckling and saying, "But what is modern psychology?" And again, the heavy hitters were up there giving very intellectual answers, all the right answers, the correct, politically correct responses about what modern psychology is. And it happens that John Kabat-Zinn, whose program we teach, was on the stage with these psychologists and psychiatrists, and he was sitting near the Dalai Lama, and he was the only non-medical person up there. And Kabat-Zinn got up and he said, and I'll never forget it, and I used it tonight because it felt like it fit. He stood up and he said to the Dalai Lama and to us, "Modern psychology is the West's attempt to alleviate the suffering of those beings who have mistaken a small part of themselves for the whole." So I just want to say that one more time because I'm kind of in love with that. I'll never forget how he said that. So he said, "Modern psychology is the West's attempt to alleviate the suffering of those beings who have mistaken a small part of themselves for the whole." And the kind of personal story that reminds me of is many years ago, a very dear friend of mine had gone through a very painful divorce, and she found her way to meditation, and she actually went to India, and she was living in an ashram. And she wrote me a beautiful letter after living there for a long time. And in the letter she said, "When I first came here, I was in so much pain. And I realized that I was so afraid of loneliness. And over time," she said, "I realized that what I really was afraid of was my own emptiness. And here I've realized that I'm not empty at all." And as soon as she had that direct experience of not being empty at all, but being full, she was freed from the pain that she had been suffering. So I just love to remember her and share that story.